Good morning, and if you didn't recognize, you're in the room where the Gin Blossoms were rocking and cranking last night, but just so you know, we are not the Gin Blossoms.
Sorry.
I'm Mark Kashman. I'm on the SharePoint team here from Redmond, and today we'll be focusing on teamwork governance, and here with Melissa Hubbard.
My name's Melissa Hubbard, and I am a project manager with a company called Witham Digital, based out of the Washington, D.C. area, and I am a Microsoft MVP, and excited to be here with Mark to talk about teamwork governance.
Yeah, so excited to have Melissa here to give you the real world. You know, whatever Mark talks about, he's just going to be trying to get you to use the product and be happy with it. But Melissa will ground it with what's the reality of why you should use it. But all the way through, hopefully you'll get a good sense that we're not trying to create Office 365 groups or Microsoft Teams or SharePoint sites that are connected to all these other applications to scare the pants off of IT. We really want to give you all the control that you need based on whatever policies you have, and those could differ across the organization. And we also want to empower your end users so that they feel like they can get their work done. They may only need a place to store files, or they may be a real complex team that has needs for tasks. They like to converse and chat and have that persist through history. So there's a lot of tools that can help them be very productive and be very connected. So as you're streaming in, just one last check. This is the session that you've chose to be here in the morning. We're very grateful for that. Teamwork governance, we're going to go through lots of things to show you what the end user experience is, but to really dive into the IT control side of it.
Yeah, all right, let's get started.
So this is a slide that we haven't used much at this event, but it is still something that we think at least grounds what it is that we're talking about today. And when you think about your people working across the organization, working one-on-one as an individual, a lot of their time is going to be spent being collaborative. And we know that when people are collaborative, they're more productive and hopefully more engaged with what the entire organization is doing or what their individual group is doing. So on the left-hand side, we consider a lot of what we're going to cover the inner loop. This is where people are working on a day-to-day project. They know who they're working with. They know what their deadlines are. And there's a lot of information that they're working on that they don't necessarily want to share with the whole organization. It may not be top secret, but it might not be something that they want to share with everybody until a point in time. And at that point in time, that's when the outer loop comes into play. When they want to communicate broadly across the organization and be loud and proud about decisions they made, semi-private, and then publicly. But when we say publicly, if we say public or private, we still mean mostly within your organization. But we will spend some time today talking about using and working with external users.
And when I've showed clients this slide, a lot of the questions I get is, this is so confusing on, what should I do where? How do I know I'm in the right place doing the right type of work? And my message has always been, you can provide guidance, but at the end of the day, are people getting their work done? Is your data safe? If people are being productive and achieving their goals, do we really need to worry exactly about which tool they're doing it in? And just be glad about that. There's so many options that are working for different people and different demographics and different offices, et cetera.
Last thing here is because you see SharePoint and Stream in the middle, we're not trying to overinflate our egos from a product perspective, but really ground in the reality that where you put your content will adhere to a lot of those same principles, no matter what entry point people have to it. But of course, it all abides by all of the same security and compliance rules at the most parent level of your entire tenant. But what you'll really see us go into is how you can then enable a lot of different user groups to work in a lot of different ways based on maybe sales and marketing, who can be very open and transparent with what they're doing. And it's okay, for a lot of people to see it, versus maybe a legal team or an HR team that's working on policies that maybe until they're ready to be shared, can't expose that beyond what it is that they want to on that particular time. So if you go a little bit step further and you just look at then what is teamwork amongst all of this, and hopefully just the broad definition of teamwork can be just me and Melissa working on this presentation together before we come to the conference, or a sales proposal that's getting ready to be shared out to a client, or something as complex as a new product or a new project that's getting started and it's got 50, hundreds, maybe thousands of people working together and all have their distinct roles. And even the difference of a life cycle of whatever they're creating, from the early phases of just ideation and creation, all the way through something that's getting deemed to be final, of course then moving in the longer phase of things like archive. But we do look at this across the whole suite, And because a lot of applications that we'll cover today cover different types of file types or different types of conversation modalities, we do want to enable a lot of these to be as connected and as a consistent experience across the end user experience. But at the same time, again, where we're going to ground a lot of this is from an IT management, control, reporting, and awareness perspective.
Right, and so when we think about the modern workplace and what people are needing, a lot of us are working remotely, we're working cross-functionally, we're on a lot of different teams. Teamwork is so important, and as Mark said, being able to manage it underneath and still allow people to get their work done quickly and in an efficient manner becomes really important. So you have to have the tools in place, which we're going to be showing you today.
Yeah, so you want people to be able to find other people, other work, be able to repurpose things so you can save time to get to a faster time to market. So search and AI are deeply important and deeply embedded and integrated in these experiences, but not at the loss of being able to control permissions and manage access. Of course, security from every layer. If you want to go into the depth, there's a great security session with Liam Cleary where he goes into a lot of great depth for SharePoint, but now broader Office 365. Yeah. And even in the teamwork space, even though not as common in the outer loop, more common in the outer loop, is the ability to extend. But for teamwork, a lot of the extensions are more configurations these days with Power Apps and Flow and the ways that you can build out your unique solutions that are unique to the team. But I think enough of the grandstanding as far as hopefully you are still feeling like you're in the right room. We'll get into some of the nitty-gritty when you start to identify what is this thing they call teamwork, what are Office 365 groups, and then of course all the connected apps that we'll get into. So we'll start with maybe some of the common questions and governance issues.
Right, so before we even get started with what the possibilities are for governing teamwork, let's just think about what goals are we trying to accomplish. This varies from organization to organization, but mostly we want to be able to get our work done as quickly and efficiently as possible. We want to have the tools that we need. We want to be able to be mobile, but we also want our informational assets to be safe. We want people to be able to find everything, and we want it to be a consistent experience so that people don't need a ton of new training and they can get their work done. When you think about your goals, the next thing is who's going to help you achieve them? Who do we need to find? Who are your stakeholders for your teamwork governance? Usually those come in the forms of Office 365 administrators, SharePoint site owners, team owners, trainers. We need to find those people and start making a plan and setting tasks for what's going to need to happen. So if your goals are that you want people to be able to get their work done and you want all of your data to be safe and searchable, what tasks do you need to do? What policies do you need to set? Do you need to set data loss prevention policies, retention policies, expiration policies? So those are the things we want to think about before you even start looking at the technology. Have a goal in mind. What does your desired end state look like with teamwork? And so some of the common concerns that we look to solve with governance plans, the big one that we hear all the time is, oh my gosh, people are going to create so many teams and so many sites, and it's going to be this crazy Wild West, and IT is not going to be able to manage it. We're not going to know who's working on what. People aren't going to be able to find their precious data. And user adoption will suffer. Another thing people worry about is that intellectual property will be lost. Maybe someone will delete things accidentally. Maybe it'll get moved into the wrong SharePoint site and no one will be able to find it. And then with guests, that can be a scary thing for a lot of organizations. It's really important to be able to work with guests, whether it be our clients or other vendors, other companies who you've partnered with. It's really important to be able to share data in a safe way, because if you don't give them away, it's just going to be done in email or in shadow IT. So you want to make sure that you give people the option to share with guests when it's needed, but you want to be in control of it and make sure that the right people are adding guests in the right places. You want to make sure that everyone can access the things that they need. They're not going to be lost in navigation, not ever being able to find their files, their chat messages. And people worry about the performance if there's going to be too many teams and sites. So hopefully today, Mark and I will help calm some of these concerns and talk about how we can address those in a governance plan for teamwork. So governance planning should start before you even roll out your teamwork tools. 3 main things that you want to consider is provisioning groups and membership, protecting group resources, and managing the group life cycle. So provisioning, you can have dynamic provisioning, so when a new employee is added into your organization, based on attributes in their profile, such as their department or their location or their role, they can be added into the right groups automatically, saving everyone time. Then for the protection of group resources, that's where we start thinking, do we need multi-factor authentication? I would say, yes, you do. And then also setting data loss prevention policies, possibly e-discovery. Is there a possibility you would need a legal hold on some of your documents and assets, looking into the policies you need to protect your group resources, and then managing that group lifecycle, as Mark started to mention. What is the beginning and end of a group? And I'm saying group, but this also applies for Microsoft Teams as well. So if a team was created for a project, when is the starting point of the team, and what is going to happen to that team when that project is over with? And you can set expiration policies and also retention. I'm not clicking it. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so this slide we want to use as a big reference. I know it's a lot of words, sorry about that. Hopefully on the big screen. Okay, there, it doesn't look so bad. So we wanted to use this as a reference point. Basically, all of the decisions that you want to be taking a look into when you're planning governance for teamwork. So naming conventions, you have the ability to set prefixes and suffixes. This can be string, or it can be string values, like just a set of text, or it can be attributes from the person who's creating the group. So it could be their department with the team name, with their role. So there's options there for naming conventions. You want to think about if that's necessary or not. People do name their teams and groups some strange things if you don't provide guidance at least. And then the big one is who can create. Do you want to have an open creation policy, or do you want to start managing that so only certain people in your organization can create SharePoint sites, can create groups, can create teams, can create shared libraries in OneDrive? And that's a big decision, and it varies from organization to organization. So configuring your expiration policies, again, what is that life cycle going to look like? And you don't have to set an expiration on every group or team. You can nitpick certain ones that you may want to apply this to or not. You do have that ability. And then configuring your guest access, again, looking at who should be able to add guests and in what way guests should be able to interact in your teamwork. Setting policies. So here we talk about retention, e-discovery, and data loss prevention policies. If your business is if your business has PII that they're gathering, credit card information, you definitely want to set those policies so they can't be sharing that outside of the organization. Those things can be blocked. Again, for e-discovery, is there going to be any need for a legal hold on your content or communications? And retention, how long do you need to keep things? I've done a lot of federal consulting, and retention periods were huge things, where figuring out internal policies for how long the government needs to keep what type of information. And then the use of templates. This is an important one so that you can get that consistent feel with your SharePoint sites and your teams. So there is the ability to use team templates. I'm going to be showing a demo later where you can create a team based on another team. So you can have kind of a team template layout and easily self-service a team using a template. And then with SharePoint, with site designs and themes, you want to make sure everyone's getting a consistent feel so that they're not confused when they're creating sites. And then monitoring, before you even start your governance planning, or I mean, before you even roll out, you want to have a plan of how you're going to monitor these things. So it doesn't just set it up and go away. You need to have a plan in place for monitoring, and luckily you have different admin centers, the Team Admin Center, the SharePoint Admin Center, Office 365 Admin Center, group reports, and then the Office 365 adoption content pack with Power BI is really powerful as well. So this way you can get insights on your usage and then make changes where you see that there are proficiencies.
It's really important to know that you have a lot of choice that you can make, and that you also have to be in tune with what the rest of the business actually requires, so that if you lock up too much, the business won't be able to be as productive as they need to be. And if you keep it too open, you're going to run yourself crazy, obviously, trying to catch up with everybody. If you have this feeling of team sprawl or team sites getting created without your awareness, there's a lot of ways that you can create what it's going to get created before it gets created. And then, of course, monitoring, auditing, reporting. There's a lot of tools to give you a sense of what's been created, who do I need to reach out to. You'll get into a sense when we get to the later part of the presentation around the importance of training and just awareness. But hopefully this slide is a little hard to see because there's a lot that you can accomplish to get that control, at least comfort zone for you, to be able to enable a self-service model for people to get their work done and not have it feel like it's run amok. So one of the first and most key things, if you've never heard of Office 365 groups, or if when you think of Office 365 groups, you think, oh, that's what all these applications are. But at the root, Office 365 groups is just a list of members. And it's actually, from a technical perspective, it's just an object, a group object in Azure AD. There's a couple entry points from an admin perspective to be able to manage groups. At the most parent level, if you're an Azure AD manager, you certainly can manage the groups alongside security groups and, of course, individuals. And as you get into the Office 365 admin, depending on how you delegate roles for administration, there are certain things that, of course, you can do from a group's perspective to manage groups. But again, it's just a list of people. If Melissa and I were a part of a group and she and I were the owners of the group, and then we invited 10 members, of course, within that group object in Azure AD, we would be listed as owners and members. And that's as simple as it is. And this is something that you can certainly build a lot off of. Certainly once you have an object in AD, you can build a lot of permissions off of that. And then the value of what a lot of these group-connected experiences, like Teams, like SharePoint team sites, planner plans, shared calendars and Exchange, that all get connected for the groups. They're all controlled, that entry point. When I sign in a browser, on a mobile device, if I go into a business desk here at the hotel, I will be signing in through that object. So it'll ask me, who is Mark? And I'll sign in, and I can see whatever it is that I'm navigating to. If I'm going to one of these group-connected spaces, or a team, or I'm just replying to an email and attaching a document coming from that group, it's always going to ask, does he have permissions to do this? And that is the role of Office 365 groups, to give individuals like Melissa and I the ability to create a space for us to work, to invite people in, but then to have that be something that we can think from a permissions perspective to invite people in. Take a quick question. Yep, so the question is, from an Azure AD admin perspective, can you have somebody who has a role that manages groups versus giving them the keys to manage all of Azure AD, depending on what you've bought, obviously beyond Office 365 groups. And the reason why in my demo I'll show you both Azure AD and how you can manage groups, but if you don't have permissions to go where you can go and manage groups outside of Azure, is that difference in how you can delegate the different roles. If you don't want to give somebody the keys to Azure AD admin, but you do want them to manage groups, they can do that from the Office 365 Admin Center, which is a little bit of a level down from a groups and permissions perspective.
And in case I forget to mention it later on, it's definitely best case to have at least 2, probably more like 3 or 4 group owners or team owners.
Yep. So we want to walk through a few things just in terms of from that list that was just the giant list of all the things that you have to control. And then we'll jump into demos and then certainly land on some thoughts on how you might get started. So certainly we want you to think not to turn off this guest thing, not to turn off this internal groups thing. However you reference it, if you came in with a mindset of this is a little dangerous, it feels a little scary, I'm hesitant, I need to know X or Y before I do it, that's what we're here for. And certainly there's a lot of people that if you go and talk to Melissa after the session, go into the expo hall, there's a lot of experts that will help you think in terms of governance and what you can do so that you can do it right from the start. But again, think in terms of how you're empowering the end user. You'll see my first part of my demo is really what is the end user experience? What are the tools that you're either keeping from them if you don't enable it, or what are the tools that you're enabling them with to get their work done, and hopefully with the way that Microsoft is building our technology to be as productive as they can. So we want it enabled for all users, hopefully, but there are ways to create and enable only certain people to be able to create groups. The thing you have to remember with groups is if you limit their creation, that's completely okay. You don't want to limit who they can invite in. So if you do have a set of users or across the different organizations, different groups within those organizations, you can enable them, which is that limited part, to give them the ability to create groups, or you can set it through IT to go and create the group and contact IT for them to then create the group on behalf. But then it is the role of the owner, once the group is created, to be able to invite in who they need to. So even if I can't go to create a group, I certainly should be able to be invited into one. And then once I'm in, I don't need to be an owner for that type of role. But if you limit the creation at the outset, or you don't enable people to at least be able to discover it in some way where they can get these great tools, especially if you're a really large organization, you may end up being the bottleneck in just managing all of these things, where you may just need to manage a certain level of criteria of the certain groups that get created, but there might be a good majority of ones based on certain criteria that can just get created, and you can then monitor, train, and follow up with them. But just know that you can certainly have it on for everybody, or target certain users and groups to only be able to create groups. From a naming policy perspective, this is a pretty easy one to see in demo. But you should know you can do this in two ways. There is a way through Azure AD where you can effectively assert a name. So no matter what anybody types in, you can either have a prefix or a suffix appended to that name so that it adheres to your naming policy. Or you can certainly just put out best practices and guidance so that if this is something that you want to have department underscore whatever name they put in, you can either promote that or you can enforce it technically. So there's a lot of guidance in terms of what's too long, what's too short. There are ways where in the tool you'll see I can make it so there are either selected attributes that we have already in the system, or people can type in whatever they want, which then follows to make sure that that you have a naming guidance at least out there. There are some limitations in terms of the maximum length of a name, so be cognizant of how many suffix and prefix information you put in there, and know that end users can essentially type what they'd like when they're naming their name.
And you do have the ability to block words, and one common one I've seen is if there was an acquisition, you don't want, you can block the old company's name because you want everybody to be joining this new culture with a new company name. So that's one example of blocking a word for a group name or team name. Using the words IT, you don't want people to get confused and think that it's your IT department, and it's not. So those are just some that I've heard of, like blocking certain department names because you want to call them something else, or you just don't want there to be confusion or inappropriate things like that. You have the ability to block.
One of the key ones, and this is one that I sort of live by the way that Microsoft has me set up, is you can set group expiration policy. So when somebody creates a group, the clock starts ticking, and it is a nice system in terms of the auto notifications that people will get through email and the easy renewal steps that they can take. It's sort of the if you do nothing, this group will slowly die and then go into a recycle bin and then be flushed out of the system. And that follows all the same patterns that hopefully you know, but to be clear, after 93 days, that group would then be flushed out of the system. And one thing I want to be clear on, because it's tied to expiration, or if you do an active deletion, is when you delete any part of a group, whether I go in and explicitly delete a SharePoint team site that's connected, or I delete the group itself from Azure AD, or I delete the team in Teams, that will actually go through a deprovisioning of all of those connected applications.
Everything.
And that's one thing where a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to delete the site, but I'll keep the chat going. You should know that they're all connected, and you don't want to lose anything. But it's easy to set what the expiration time and duration is. And I'll tell you, as an owner of a couple of sites within Microsoft, I get an email, and there are some that I just let go because I know it was just a short term that I needed them. But like the one that I do for the conference, we obviously wanted that beyond the initial 90 days. We had about 320 people working on it. We didn't want to, have anybody disappear, so we just hit the renew button, and it was as simple as that. And I have one project ongoing that is the Intrazone podcast, and I have a lot of people that I work with, both internally and externally as guests. When I get that email, it's really important to me as a user of that site or owner of that site to keep clicking renew, but it is adhering to that Microsoft IT policy.
One thing I don't think we mentioned yet, Mark, was that also, if you're going to limit who in your organization can create teams, for example, you can't just do that for teams. You have to limit it for everything. So they would not be able to create groups, planners, et cetera. So it's on or off. You can create or you can't.
And when you set the expiration policy, like Melissa said, you can set it differently for different groups. So it doesn't have to be everybody is 180 days or 30 days. So you might have some teams that need a little bit longer period of time, or some teams that you actually want to limit so that that type of information doesn't stay around too long.
We've got some questions.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I did see one question from the front,
here.
and then wherever you saw. So we'll start with Paul in the front.
Okay.
The question is, if you have group expiration policy that you set to a certain number and groups that existed before that, will that then adhere to that? I believe if it's just a blanket expiration policy that it would apply to them, but I'll have to double check that because I don't know if we had actually started counting day 0 for all groups. But I'm sure that we would and that it would apply to them, but I can double check on that.
Okay, what's your question?
Yeah, it's regarding what you need to apply on these governance controls. This is my understanding, Azure AD 2 or something like that.
Right, so the question is, what do you actually need to be able to do some of these policies and create some of these things? So the answer is you need Azure P1 services for some of these things.
Yep, there's a few. The dynamic groups require the Azure AD Premium and the naming policy if you want to, and what I'll show you in the Azure AD. Pretty much everything else is standard stuff that you can do in the Office 365 admin. Or if you have Azure, certainly you can monitor and manage and do a lot with groups if that person is already doing that. I believe it's Premium 1, but I'll double check on that. But I believe it's Premium 1.
That's my thought too. I think we have someone over here.
Yeah, over here. So the question was, with the expiration strategy, based both on how we've designed it and how you would leverage it, is that to limit the duration or the term of what these groups and how long they would exist? Partly, yes. There's a lot of feedback that we get around these sites are getting created and they feel like they're just sprawl and it's hard to manage. We hope to dispel that with what you can do. But the value of what these sites are is, I might create it for a big event. Let's just say, for sake of this conference, we did create a SharePoint Conference 2019 team site. And we'll probably want to keep that around for about a year total. So I'm going to have to hit renew a couple of times. But the real thing is, at some point in time, the information that's stored in that environment, that space, is going to be out of date. So what we're trying to limit, or what we're hearing from feedback, is we don't want people to find old content, old discussions, old conversations, old templates, whatever. There may be some things that I'll steal so that I remembered, what did we say last year? And I can carry that forward, and I would do that proactively. But think in terms of a campaign, a project, anything that might be like a big party your company is planning, it just doesn't need to be around for a long time. So a lot of the feedback is we don't want it to be around for a long time. But if you need it to stay around, you can set their expiration so IT feels comfortable with at least nudging people to keep things. And if they don't hit renew, then it does flush out of the system, which means content is removed. Teams don't have as many things in front of their eyeballs to manage, if that's ever a concern. But there's a lot of things that we're doing to make it so that you can pin your favorites, and the graph that is identifying what are you most active in, what's most relevant to you. But from a governance, retention, archive perspective, the value is with expiration, you know you're getting rid of things, but with visibility for people to renew if they need to. One more question, then we'll move on.
The administrator.
Yep. So the person who gets notified, the question was, if you're a site owner, would they be the one that gets notified to renew the group? And the answer is yes. So what you're looking at here is the new home site for Contoso Electronics. And for me, I'm Nestor signed in, and I want to create a site. So we're first going to show you from the end user perspective that. So from the home site, I'm going to go into my SharePoint. And in my SharePoint, I'll go full screen so we can. From my SharePoint is one of the entry points that you'll see to create a group. And from SharePoint perspective, I just want to come and create a site because I need a place to manage all of our content. I want to highlight a lot of news and information that I want to proliferate throughout the team. So I'm going to go in and create a site. And the two site types are team site and communication site. Obviously today we're talking about team sites. And I'll just go in here and say, Melissa is awesome. And we'll see if that's a name that I can use. And it looks like I'm within the policy. But if you squint and look, what's getting...
You didn't lock it.
I didn't lock Melissa is awesome. But it says the site name is available, but it's also appended project-Melissa is awesome -Contoso. And so I went a little extreme on what it is this name is going to be. But from the group perspective, it's going to maintain exactly what it is that I want it. I can go in like any group. I can make it either private or public because this is a public statement. We want to make this publicly available. And we're going to keep the language. But if you didn't know, with SharePoint sites, you can now set the language at the time that you actually create it. So it's not a headache to do it later. When I click Next, we're going to go in and give our friend Diego some superpowers. And he'll be one of our owners. And we'll add Patty as one of our members. And like we had mentioned before, what's going to get created now is that new Azure AD object. And it's going to be called Melissa is Awesome. And it's going to have Diego as the owner. And it's going to have Patty as a member. So click Finish. And it'll take us, as you expect, right into the SharePoint site. But there's a lot of things that are now available to this group. It's not just the SharePoint site, but it's going to be a lot of other connected applications. You can see how the naming policy now has been applied. And if you go into the group card, you can start to see a lot of what's getting created. We have now an email inbox for this. We have a lot of other connected apps, others that will be showing up soon. But we've got our group email, group calendar, group notebook. The group notebook is stored in the connected team site in the site assets. You've got the site itself, which is what you see in the background, and the planner plan, which has also now got some nice new connections to SharePoint. If we go into the members, shouldn't be a surprise who we see here. We haven't really invited people yet. Once they've accessed the site and said, yes, I do want to be a part of that, then they'll show up here. And then, of course, when we start emailing and any files that get created. So that's generally what it looks like on day 0 as an end user. And as people start to use it, if I go into that same group card, you'll see obviously there's a lot more activity. And you'll see that we've got a number of members. We've got a lot of activity here in terms of the different files and email. And it's all based on what it is the team is doing, either most recently or what's based on most relevant. And you can do, of course, a lot of searching and get a lot of information. There's a lot of great sessions that have been throughout that obviously go into the depths of team sites, so I'm not going to drain it here. But I do want to highlight one more thing is this particular site is a group-connected site that's a part of a SharePoint hub site. So there is an aspect to be able to join multiple sites together that could come from multiple groups. So it is certainly important to know that you can organize and gather around hub sites that gives you a little bit of an extra layer at the organization level to further plan and organize how do you want people to be organized with their content. So if we flip over and look at it from an administration perspective, we'll go first into Azure AD, which I will be very transparent is not my comfort zone. But this is Azure AD, and if you look at it from a dashboard perspective, of course you can see in the bottom left where user and groups are. You can see as they get created and what are the different activities. That's just from a dashboard perspective. But if I go into sort of the depths of where I'd like to take you, I want to first show you if I go into Manage Groups, some of the different options that you have. So this was the question that we had over here, and in the middle here, combining two of the questions. This is if I do have the rights to be a delegated admin for Azure AD, this is where I go. And if I wanted to delegate groups, you'll see that next, where somebody else could do it. So in general, I can see the different groups that have been created, and if we look up Melissa, we should see our new one here. Oh, where is Melissa? Did I spell it wrong?
Yep.
I did.
2 S's.
I always love it when I spell it wrong, and that's why you didn't see it. Should be here. No groups. All right, we'll keep looking for Melissa. I feel like I'm just spelling it wrong, and I can't see it. All right, so, but from a general perspective, a lot of things that you can do, if you look at Office 365 groups, you can go in and select whether users can create or not. So this is the master switch. We hope this is always yes. And you can assign from a permissions perspective who can assign members as group owners. One of the things that we mentioned was the expiration policy. So this is currently set to 180 days. And if you look at the drop-down, you have the choice to either use our defaults or type in custom. So if we want to be a little bit more stringent, we can have this expire in 30 days. It'll always contact the group owner greater than 3 days.
Yeah, 30 is the...
How about 31?
Yeah, 30 is the lowest amount you can do. Yep.
Sorry. So 31 days or greater. If you have somebody who's listed as a site owner, they'll of course get that renewal email. But if you have somebody that you would want to always get it if there isn't a site owner, because that sometimes happens where people leave the group, that you can always have somebody listed as somebody who will get contacted. The other thing from a naming policy perspective that I showed you is how you set that up. So Melissa had mentioned you can set up blocked words. You can upload them here through a CSV file. But I want to show you the naming policy that I have set up. So I just set it up as a string, as a prefix to be project dash, and as a suffix to add dash contoso. But just to show you a little bit, if I wanted to set it up as an attribute, you'll see here that I have different choices, like department, company, office, state, or providence. And you don't have to spell out words. You could have it just be acronyms that you commonly use, or like Melissa said, if you wanted to do _HR for the HR group, you can do a lot of things per group. So you can set it here, and of course, it'll get adhered at that time of provisioning, with you being able to set it up before one gets created in the first place. So if I move into the next level of sort of administration delegation, it's the Office 365, or what we now call the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. As you can see here, of course, this is the new look and feel if you opt into it, but there is still the availability of the previous view. And if I go into groups, again, to answer that question, and this is how I hope we see Melissa, we'll do one refresh and then do a search. Oh, we'll do, see if it's just stubborn. All right, well, we're going to keep working on that one. And just make sure that things get created. So from a group perspective, this is one that I created last night that also follows through as it is an Office 365 group. It's public and it has 8 members. And as the administrator, I can go in here, and if I need to, I can manage things. If I want to change the description, be more clear, or adhere to policies by changing things, I can. I can, from here, manage owners. So if somebody who shouldn't be an owner is, I can change that as an administrator. I can add of course, members. I can go in and start to change some of the settings for that group. And this is, again, at the most parent level of Microsoft 365. They chose public, but it should be private. I can click that and make it private. If I want them to allow senders to this email group to external users, we can do that. And we can send copies of group conversations and events to group members, which means everybody sees everything from a communication perspective. Users can certainly opt out of that initially, but if you enforce this, then everybody will get the communications that you want them to. And then last thing I want to show you here is from a usage perspective. Once people actually go in and start using these tools, you can go in and navigate whether it's over 30 days, 90 days, 180 days. Obviously, this tenant was built for this conference, so it's got the most recent activity. And I can see a lot of what's happening around Office 365, Exchange, SharePoint, and of course, Microsoft Teams. And as I scroll down, I'm going to center in on SharePoint. And I want to learn a little bit about what are people doing in SharePoint. And if I navigate down to the bottom, you'll see that I can see all the actions that are being logged across all the different sites. So I get some nice broader information at the top, but I can see what files have been viewed, what files have been synced, what files have been shared internally or externally. So there's a lot of information that clearly here is just a dump of data that you can then export and do reporting either through Excel, or if you set up a dashboard through Power BI, you can refresh that data and have that be a lot of rich information so you know what's going on, what are people doing. The last thing that I want to show is in the SharePoint Admin Center. This is where, of course, I get the most visibility into these group connected sites. And really, before a couple of months ago, if you weren't on the new Admin Center for SharePoint, you would see, you would not be able to see your group connected sites. But now you can see them, and so I'm just going to pivot on anything with project underscore, and we should see at least a couple. I don't know why, it looks like our search is just failing me today.
You need to edit your with.ini file.
That's not going to happen right now, but thank you. What's that? Oh, dash. Gosh, I hope you're all right. And I love that. Thank you so much. Yes. So to whoever just said that, I have a pair of socks here for you. And if there were two people yelling out the same thing, there are two pairs of socks up here. Thank you very much. Let us continue. On the recording, please delete that last section. So here, Melissa is awesome. You already knew that. You didn't need the demo to prove that, right?
Exactly.
But certainly, if I need to find a group connected site, I can do that. If I need to report on all of them and see how they're being used, how much content they're using, how many external users have been invited, if it's available to them, you can do all that here. But the main thing I want to show you is that you can actually control things at a pretty granular level. So for SharePoint and OneDrive, or I should step back and say, for your entire tenant, you can say, we will not allow external users. And then you can't do it from any of these entry points. But if you have it turned on for everybody, doesn't mean that everything is exposed. It just means the individual site owners can then decide, how do I want to share? Do I want to share externally? If you've given them the capability, they certainly can. But then you can start to infer how are they going to share. If they want to share with everyone from OneDrive, that's great. But maybe from SharePoint, you only want to do it so that existing guests can have that. And they're just dials and ways to think about it. But there's also a lot of other things that you can enforce. Just to give you a sense, not to fully drain what's on this page, but to show you that you can control what people can do, whether you want them to be able to share links from files and folders. Other settings down here is if you wanted to limit the duration of when sharing links get created, you can do that. So if I do site access for new guests will expire, and this can be different than the group expiration. This can be even a very short amount of time, hopefully less than 30, we'll see. 30 is the day. So that's at the broad level. If you share a link to a document, you can limit it to a very short amount of time. Last thing to show you here is from a Hub's perspective. If I want to go back into a site, and we'll just choose anyone here, we'll go into the benefit site. At the top, per site, I can go and as an admin, enforce the sharing like you just saw, or I can now register this as a Hub site. This one is already, or I can deregister it, and we'll see if we want to add Melissa. Dash. Oh, gosh. Darn it, sorry. I'll get it right by the end of the day. Project Dash, good. There's Melissa. And we want to give Melissa, either we can make her site, a Hub site, or we can associate it to a Hub site. So as an admin, and it really is an admin role if you want to use Hub sites, to create them in the first place, but then to associate them. But you can also now give the keys once something's a Hub site. Within the Hub site itself, you can define a group using either a security group or an Office 365 group to give them permissions within the Hub site to be able to create a new site that's already associated to it. But this is a way to do it as an admin. So I'm going to pause and hand over to Melissa.
So you want me to go to my demo?
Oh, sorry.
This is your stuff.
Yeah, sorry. Let me take a one sip. So there's certainly a lot of value being able to invite external users. And these are people that don't necessarily count against a license. If somebody is a part of your company and you try to license them as a guest, that's not, of course, appropriate. But if you're inviting a vendor, a client, a partner to be able to come into your space and to be able to provide content, that's certainly something you most are welcome to do and are capable of doing with Office 365 groups, and of course a lot of what you'll see from a Teams and a SharePoint perspective. But this enables you to bring them in, and you can enforce what they can do once they're in. They only have access to what they've been invited to. And this just works where you invite somebody via an email address, they sign in based on an authentication that's either by password or by code, so they're multi-factor. And then once they're in, you can control what they have access to do. They only have access to the groups that they've been invited into. And once they're in as a group member, they can see the shared calendar. They can add and create and view documents. They can certainly be assigned a task in Planner. And there's just a lot that they can do to be a valuable member of your team. But from an admin perspective, especially from a site owner perspective, you can limit what guests can do. You can assign them just view-only permissions. You can do a lot of things if you need to make it so that it's inviting for what you need from them, but not something where you feel overexposed.
In Microsoft Teams, you can also limit what guests can do in your teams as well.
Yep. So one other way to think about it, and then we'll take a question, is all of the different ways that you can set up for guest access. So there are a lot of different user permissions where you can actually enable certain people to be able to invite guests, and that's that manager of the group who can send that invitation. You might not want every member of the group to be able to do that. You can restrict it by domain. So if you want to work with specific companies, specific vendors, but nobody but that list of vendors and partners, you can certainly limit that so the only people from those domains can be invited. And there's a level of, at the group level, where the group access can be enabled or disabled for certain members. Sorry, I guess that's a little bit repetitive on the one side. The owner, but for also members to be able to limit who can send those invitations out to guests. Last thing on guests, sorry, I forgot we took that one slide out. So
All right.
let's switch over and learn a little bit about Teams. So we are on 3.
Yep. All right, everybody. So what I am going to demo to you today is the Microsoft Teams Admin Center so that you can get an idea of what controls you have underneath as an administrator. And then I'm going to create a team using another team as a template. So here I am in a dashboard, and I want to take a look at all of the teams that I have in my environment. So here's my centralized list. As you can see, it'll show me the guests, how many owners, team members. So this is just my own small demo tenant, so it's pretty small, but you can still get the idea. Let me click into one of these, and you can see who all of the team members are. I can add members and remove members, and then I can see the different channels in the teams, and I can add channels. And then I get a look into the settings for conversations and channels, and I'm going to be setting policies in this demo, which will be related to this. So you have the ability to set different policies for meetings and messaging. So one thing I've been telling clients to do is take a look at all the features that Microsoft Teams has, and do they all make sense for your organization? Because it's so configurable, you can really turn on or off almost anything. So let me take a look at the meeting policies. And what you do is you can create a policy and then apply it to either all of your users or only some. So I'll click here, and I'm going to scroll down. So this is looking at all the different meetings settings that we have. So an example of one, maybe you don't want to have the Outlook add-in because you think it's confusing. Sometimes organizations are still using Skype for Business, and they don't want to have both Teams and Skype in there as the Outlook admin. You could turn this off. There's just a lot of granular things you can do. For content sharing, which is important, allow share notes, allow participants to give control when you're in meetings, allow PowerPoint sharing, And then for participants and guests, you can turn off the Meet Now meeting features, and also you can allow anonymous people to start a meeting. You can turn that off as well. And by default, it comes as off. So now I'm going to go into the messaging policies. Sorry, I don't have my mouse. And I'm going to create a new messaging policy to allow owners to delete sent messages. And I'm going to turn this feature on. So this would allow team owners to be able to do some cleanup if people have been writing a lot of junk or have been using way too many GIFs and things are getting lost. Team owners can go in and delete some stuff. Now, this is a sensitive one because you're giving now your team owners power to delete your content. So that's something you would want to consider and know who is the team owner, and maybe just turn it on for a while to do a cleanup and then turn it off. But anyway, I'm creating this policy, and here's some of the other things that can be configured. So read receipts, you can actually turn chat on or off, and then some of the fun things, GIFs, and stickers, which I always say don't turn them off unless you really have a reason to, because they really help just building culture and being able to communicate and show emotion while you're in the digital workplace. So I'm going to save this. And now I'm going to apply it to users. So I'm going to go here, and this will show me all of my users in my Microsoft Teams environment. And this will let me select up to 20. So this will work for me, but if you have over 20, then you'll need to use PowerShell. So I'm going to go here and then edit settings, and then you'll see the different policies that you have available. And I'm going to select the one I created, allow owner to delete sent messages, and apply this. And now I want to show you the analytics and reports in Teams. Similar to what Mark showed, you get a pretty good insight into how things are going. I'm going to do, actually, let me do the last 28 days. And I'm going to say Teams usage. And mind you, this is my demo environment, so hopefully you will see a lot more usage in your own.
Look at the spike, though.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Big
I was probably getting ready. Yeah, probably last night. Exactly. So here you can see your total active users, Teams and channels active users, active channels, and messages. And it's from the last 28 days. And then you can drill in by the team name. And this is just one of the reports. So you have others you can take a look at. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what you have as a central administration place for Microsoft Teams. And now quickly, I'm going to go into Teams, and I'm going to create a new team using another team that already exists as a template. So I'm going to go here to create a team, and then create from a team. And I'm going to select my sales team. And I'll just leave this. This automatically will say copy. And then now here is what you can choose. You want to choose what you want to include from the original team. So here I can even bring in the members. So if this was like maybe a related sales thing, maybe a marketing team, and you know that a lot of the channels and tabs will be the same, you can click here and add them as members and create.
I had advocated that this feature would be called Teamsplits, but that didn't go. So they know them as Teams templates.
Darn.
Yeah. It is a little bit of a mouthful. Teamsplits.
All right, nice work. So I could add more people here, but so it's showing me the 2 members have already been added that were part of the team that I used to copy this. So I'm going to skip this. And there's my sales copy with my channels. And you can see here that people were it created the channels and people were added. So it's just for self-service team creation that I find that to be very powerful, because also as an admin, you could create some bare bones teams with what channels and tabs and members you want, and then let people use them and provide guidance to use those as a template. All right, let me switch back to Mark.
So because we know there's a lot that is happening behind the scenes, we just wanted to spend a little time grounding on some of the other things that the service is doing to help your users really have a nice, consistent experience, but at the same time know that there's a lot of control in how you manage content. Content being primarily in SharePoint, in Teams for conversations. So if you look at the intelligent content service that powers all of Microsoft 365, one of the valuable parts that SharePoint plays is to give you that place where you can do rich search from all applications. That's now called Microsoft Search, and discovery of that content. This is powered by AI and something that gives you access controls at even the content level. So you can restrict down to the document, to the site, to the list, to the whatever you're trying to lock down. And of course, you can keep it at the group level, private, public, and manage the users like we've been showing you, with additional capabilities of doing things from an information perspective to be able to further intelligently protect your content in the way that you need to. If you flip it and look at what's then the role of OneDrive, and we'll look at what the role of Teams, we haven't talked about OneDrive a lot, but from a group's perspective, this is a great way to access all files. Files that are created in a group-connected way land in what we call a shared library, or the document library of the SharePoint site. And it gives you these rich feature sets, whether you're in OneDrive, whether you're in Microsoft Teams, or whether you're in SharePoint, to view and work with your content as you would expect. So we're trying to elevate what that experience is, and we're trying to make it consistent so that when you see previews, you'll see them in a rich way, consistently, how you work with your content, how you share, and certainly streamlining processes with how we connect with Microsoft Flow, giving you all the manageability and security at the files level, of course. From a Teams perspective, we see the role of Teams way beyond what we often talk about from files or content, but because we start to talk about chats and meetings and things that can be recorded, and you can of course use Giphies and a lot of things. It's all manageable, it's all governable, and from a lot of times of how you use Teams to access this other content, it follows the same rule set because we don't move the content, we just give you a view into it from Teams. So that is like when you go to the Files tab on a channel, that is just giving you a window into a document library, but keeping your user experience in Teams. So if you empower people to use Teams, you know that their data is secure and where it's being stored is SharePoint on the back end, but the value is you've got this great experience for the end user, both for how they work with their content and how it's being managed. If you put it all together, you'll see that across all of these different experiences for files and content services, it's a holistic way we want to present to you how your users will be interacting with what they're doing. When they create documents, when they create sites, when they're managing lists of information and data, it all falls into the same category of it's managed the same way, they access it the same way, and they get to choose by nature of where they are in the life cycle of what they're doing, or the team that they're working with, what their preferences are, the tool that they use. And of course, it all comes together with these great applications. And of course, there are other applications like Planner and Exchange that play into this for their role. They really give you this great way to share and work together on files and of course on content throughout Microsoft 365. Last thought on templates, and then one last thought on piloting, and then we'll look to close out in Q&A.
Yes.
From a templates perspective, we think this is a great tool for either site owners, of course, for IT in the audience, to really get a hold of what gets created when it gets created. We've talked a lot about creating a site or creating a team.
Yes.
But what happens when you want to create it as a default great starting experience that you control? So you can set what columns appear, what data is available. You can enforce it permissions. If a site gets created within a hub, there's a lot of theming and branding and scoping of search, and of course permissions to who can access it. And you can do that through what we call site designs. These are easy to build, and you can change them at the time of provisioning and after. And with site designs, with hubs and site scripts, it gives you this recipe to create the site that you want to give out to your users so that you feel comfortable that it has the right things turned on or off, external sharing on or off by default from this hub, those kind of things. From a Teams perspective,
Right, yes, and for users to have that consistent experience in SharePoint, I find so important for usage and user adoption as well. And for Teams templates, you do have some options here. So you can provision Teams templates using the graph, or you have the ability to create a team using an existing team, like I just showed you. I've been hearing customers coming up with some really fancy ways to do provisioning using templates, like filling out a form where they add in owners for the teams and lists of channels, and then using the graph and flow, provisioning those teams using the template. I've even heard of bots being used where people are typing in what they want and then it gets provisioned with some approval process. So those are some options you have with Teams templates.
So where does everybody get started?
Okay, so our final message is, now you've heard of the IT controls that you have available to you, but the best way to start in your process of planning your governance is to hold a pilot. And for that pilot, set things the way you think your organization needs, but have an open mind. Find a group of people who are excited about technology. Maybe they're already using something they shouldn't be, like a different shadow IT to do their collaboration, and they might be great ones to start doing a pilot and give them training on how to use Teamwork with Office 365. Communicate what the expectations are. Some people might get really excited that they could be really part of a transformational cultural change in their organization, as we've seen Teamwork really take off and change the workplace. Give them a way to provide feedback so that you know what's working and not working, and then also be doing your monitoring underneath so you can see where the usage is and what people aren't using, and then maybe change your governance policies as needed and provide training in the areas that you see lacking.
I think the final bullet that we'll add here is also train your users on the difference between a dash and an underscore. So with that, we want to leave you with some information of where you can go to learn more. I think it's most important just to reach out and contact people that have done it before in other companies. Obviously, we've got a lot of great Microsoft MVPs that would love to chat with you and answer your questions. Microsoft is always available. There's lots of different products that you might want to know more about what their role is there. And they're all in the expo hall. Take advantage of being here at the show and talking with people that know what they're talking about. That's probably not me, but everybody else. So definitely want to leave you with a lot of resources. One asset that I did put together that's getting decent feedback and will definitely be updated after the show based on feedback from the show is the one that is the aka.ms/, sorry, I have the wrong slide here. I apologize. I'm advertising my podcast today. I didn't mean that. Is the teamwork/governance, aka.ms/teamwork/governance. And if you go to that site, you'll see a really nice rich set of information just sort of at the parent level, down through a lot of existing documentation that's available for you to go learn about everything that we talked about here and, of course, more. So with that, thank you for coming. Melissa, thanks for presenting with us.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you, everybody.
We hope you have a great last day.